Hello. All right. So today I am reading Rebel, and we are, well, not including today, we are two more readings away from the end of the book. And I'm so excited. So I'm going to let everyone hop in. And let's see. While I'm letting everybody hop in, I'm going to go charge my watch. And if you're wondering about my shirt, I like this shirt. All right, so we are going to get started. First off, spoiler alert, but today's reading is going to be pretty sad. You know, I cried when I wrote it, if that tells you anything. And yeah. So let's get to it, and I shall take that off. All right. We left off where Katerina, Dmitri, and Eduardo have just reached Katerina's castle. It's gonna be bad. The beginning of the end. When they reached the castle, Katerina dismounted from her mare and tossed the reins to a stable hand that had just arrived. She ran into the castle, calling for her father, when a maid happily told her that the king and oldest two princes were in the king's study. She let her father and brothers know everything that had happened on the trip: the weird dreams, the boy's ideas of dates, the fire, the ambush, her wound, and the letter she received in Dimitri's castle. Her brothers were beyond mad that the evil man was stalking her as he threatened the family. Her father was upset over the fact that she got hurt. We need to come up with a plan. He sent us a letter, which arrived today, that says he will be here in 1 week. How do we beat him when we don't even know who he is? The king asked. I don't know, Daddy, Katerina replied, using the term she hadn't used in years before Rose died. Meanwhile, Eduardo and Dmitri left their horses with the stable hands and put their things in their guest rooms. Katerina's mother, Lonnie, slowly walked from her room to the dining hall. She slowly sat down in her regal chair, knowing that getting there early was the only way for her to actually get to dinner on time. She was 7 months pregnant, and she couldn't wait to meet her newest baby. Maybe she would finally have another girl, like the baker's wife said she would. She might have already thought this once, but she didn't remember. She didn't remember a lot these days. Just yesterday, she had walked into her room for something and had immediately forgotten what she needed in that room. An elderly maid had found her muttering to herself about what she might have forgotten. The other woman knew that it was just baby brain, where pregnant women often forget where something is or what they were doing a moment ago. Dmitri walked to Eduardo's rooms to speak to him, but noticed that the door was open and Eduardo was not there. Then he saw weird letters on the desk. Looking around and not seeing anyone, Dmitri stepped inside Eduardo's room. He walked over to the desk and saw that Eduardo had been writing to someone and was getting pointers in how to leave the threatening letters. Dmitri was furious on behalf of Katerina and her family. He grabbed the letters and walked to the dining hall, where everyone has now gathered. He handed the letters to the king and laid out his thoughts and accusations. Eduardo denied all of the accusations, but couldn't provide proof. So King Julius had his guards put Eduardo in a cell for questioning later. Elsewhere in the world, a group of men, led by a gray-haired man, took off towards Julius's castle. Katerina and Natalia were sitting in the sitting room, talking about what happened on her journey. Natalia said, "Well, it seems like you had an interesting journey. I really like the pawn date and the bakery one." And she rubbed her stomach in happiness. "I have something to tell you, too. I'm about 4 months pregnant. I fell pregnant shortly after you left. Frederick knows and Mother knows, but the three of you are the only ones." Katerina squealed. "Thank you for telling me." She gently hugged her sister-in-law. Prince Dmitri, King Julius, Crown Prince Frederick, and Prince George gathered in the king's study. They were discussing what kind of battle strategy they would implement when the time came. Katerina opened the door and walked in. "Katerina, you shouldn't be here." "You should be helping your sister-in-law take care of your mother and the children." Julius tried to wave his daughter away. "I can help, and I will." Katerina looked at them. "Oh, pardon me." "I'm helping, father. Now, what has been thought of so far?" Dmitri, Frederick, and George smirked at the determined look on her face. They liked her determination to do what's right. "Nothing so far," answered Dmitri. "Your father has some rather peaceful tactics. They won't work with this situation, but are good for other situations." Katerina snickered. "Yes, sounds like him." She didn't mention the fact that her father had killed her grandfather. She just looked at him and saw him swallow. Katerina walked over to Frederick and George. "Congrats," she said to Frederick. He smiled down at her. "Thanks." George, Dmitri, and Julius looked confused, but George was the one to ask, "Congrats for what?" Katerina and Frederick looked at each other, smiled, and said together, "Nothing." They grinned as they looked back at the others in the room. Everyone started laughing, forgetting about the congratulations from earlier. Katerina and the others started planning. "We only have a week," she said. "We can't just stand around arguing over whose idea is best. We need to agree on a strategy and then plan on the action." Julius thought about it and then nodded. "You're right. What can we all agree on for our battle strategy? They thought about all of the strategies that had been suggested. Then Frederick looked up. What about if we all go out there with our horses, showing numbers, and try to first intimidate anyone who might be with this mysterious man? If that doesn't work, then we need to decide who goes where on the battlefield. We can't have an opening for any of them to get into the castle and attack the women and children. Speaking of, he mentioned, turning to Katerina, you should stay with the other women and the children. When her mouth opened to complain, he said, we need someone that can fight and protect others, someone that will be underestimated. Katerina saw the logic of what her brother was saying and said, okay. But if any of you are injured, I'm stepping in. Got it? I won't allow any of my family members to die on my watch. She turned to Dmitri. Don't you die either. She decided to leave before she said something that she might regret. Also, she wanted to check on her mother and sister-in-law. She walked to her mother's personal sitting room. That's where she found them. Hi, Mother. Hi, Natalia. Hi, Katerina. Lonnie smiled at her daughter. Her very pregnant belly was on display in the flowing dress she was wearing. Likewise, Natalia's pregnant belly was shown off with the stunning flowing dress. Her belly was much smaller than the Queen's and barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Hi, Katerina. Katerina walked closer to the two other women and sat in a chair near them. She told them all about the adventure and everything that had happened. It was, of course, the watered-down version because she didn't want them to worry too much. Quick note. Yes, she did tell Natalia, but now she's telling her mother. And she's telling her mother in a way that doesn't let on that she told Natalia first, if that makes it clear. Okay. Father and the guys are working on a plan to deal with the guy who's threatening us. I will be with the two of you and the children. Oh, thank goodness. I would hate for you to be out there in the middle of the fighting. Lonnie held a hand to her heart. Don't worry, Mother. I'll be there with you. Natalia saw something in her young sister-in-law's eyes that made her a little uneasy. But she held off until later that day when they were alone. You're going to do something stupid, aren't you? Katerina smiled. They want me to stay in the castle during the battle, but I told them that if even one of them gets seriously hurt, I would step in whether they liked it or not. She shook her head. I can't just let them die. I know what you mean, but do you really think you should get involved? I don't think I can just sit back and do nothing. Katerina looked out of the window at the castle grounds. This is my home. As the days passed, Katerina saw the men practicing their sword fighting. They were getting better, but Katerina was still worried. She was worried that they could possibly fail, and that the bad guy would kill her entire family. She kept an eye on her mother and her sister-in-law, watching as they moved around. Her mother, Lonnie, was getting more and more stressed, which wasn't good for her or the baby. Katerina tried to calm her down, but as the day for the battle arrived, Lonnie wasn't reasonable anymore. Katerina watched from the ground floor sitting room with her mother, sister-in-law, and younger brothers as her father led the men outside. Turning, Katerina told her younger brothers, "Boys, turn away and try to play a game. I don't want you to see this." The boys grumbled, but obeyed. "Fine," said Thomas. Katerina turned back to her mother. "You shouldn't watch either. You're 2 months away from giving birth. We don't." "No, I must watch." Lonnie stared out at the men outside. Joy and sorrow. King Julius and his men sat up tall on their horses. They watched and waited as the enemy came into view. As they got closer, Julius recognized the man in front of the smallest group of 25. It was his father's best friend, Daniel Marquis Jr. If this was about revenge, why did the man wait until now to get it? The gray-haired man led his group of 25 to where the king was. "Well, Julius, I guess this was a surprise for you. What are you doing here? Surely, if you really wanted revenge, wouldn't you have come by years ago when I was still a kid?" The man laughed eerily. "Why? When I can just wait and make your worst nightmares come true." He grinned horribly. "I just had to wait for my grandson to age up." "Oh, I hear that you're going to be a father again. I believe congratulations are in order. Or maybe condolences. Because I will just cut the child out of the bitch." Frederick growled. That was his mother this asshole was talking about. He rushed forward, drawing his sword, and aimed at the man's head. The unknown man lazily swung his sword to knock the crown prince out of his saddle, and the boy's horse ran to the stables. The crown prince had landed on his side and dislocated his shoulder. Lonnie felt a pain in her back, but just attributed it to being pregnant and being stressed. She pressed up against the glass, watching as her husband started fighting with the enemy king. Frederick was pulled away from the fight, and Julius and Daniel Marquis Jr. fought viciously. They traded blows from their horses as their men fought around them. Ow. Lonnie gasped in relief as she saw her son being pulled back, and cried out as the pain in her back traveled to her stomach. She doubled over as the maids came to escort her to the birthing rooms. Katerina wanted to go with her, but Lonnie gasped out, "Don't. Please keep an eye out." Katerina nodded and watched as her mother was taken away. Natalia and the boys followed after. Julius nicked the other man's cheek, but the gray-haired man retaliated with a slash across Julius's chest and stomach. Julius fell from his horse, hitting the ground hard. Then his opponent leapt down to finish him off. When Katerina saw that, she ran out of the castle and down to the battle. Her brothers tried to stop her, and Dmitri tried to stop her, but she grabbed her father's sword and attacked her father's enemy. He turned to face off with her, and she glared at him. Her fury let her perform better than ever. She was moving faster, hitting harder, and she only had one thing on her mind. She wounded the man before she dealt the final blow, which went against her morals. He and his men retreated. The old enemy went one way. The old enemy king went one way, and the others went another way. Katerina didn't understand at first. But then she realized that maybe they were the ones from that village of women. Katerina spun on her heel and looked at her brothers. "We need to get father to the healing halls," she said, and walked back to the castle. The two brothers and Dmitri stared at the princess before they got the king and headed back to the castle after her. They hurried the king to the healing halls. They wanted to get him healed as quickly as possible. The boys told the healers what happened, and then they had to wait outside while the healers got to work. Frederick's shoulder was popped back into place and was bandaged up. Katerina waited for her mother to give birth, and it was only 30 minutes later that the midwife came out to collect her and her sister-in-law. The queen had given birth to a healthy baby girl. Katerina was happy to see that she was no longer being punished for being jealous when she was 5. Natalia rubbed her barely showing 4-month pregnant belly and sighed happily. Soon, they were going to have a much larger family. Katerina didn't want to ruin that happy mood, but she felt like she had to tell them that the king was injured. They had to go see him before it was too late. It looked like a really bad wound, and Katerina was scared to lose her dad. When she told her mother and sister-in-law, they all went to see the king. Katerina's brothers all welcomed the new princess, and they sat back down to wait. The healers came outside to tell the family that they should come inside to say goodbye. The king was dying and wanted to see them. Katerina stared at her father. He was lying so still, and she was so scared. She noticed that his eyes were open, and everyone got closer. He raised his hand and held his wife's hand. He spoke up. "I want all of you to be strong. Frederick will be king after me. Katerina will marry Dmitri." He coughed, and droplets of blood formed on his bottom lip. Katerina lurched forward, but her older brother held her back. A nurse wiped the blood from the king's lip and returned to her place. The king continued, "Don't let what happened to me ruin your lives." He noticed the bundle in his queen's arms, realizing that she was up and about after just giving birth. "Is that the new baby, boy or girl? And what?" He stopped because of a coughing fit. "Yes, this is our daughter. She doesn't have a name yet, and I know I'm supposed to be resting, but I had to come say goodbye." Lonnie sniffled. She couldn't leave her husband now, not when they all had to say goodbye. She sat on the edge of the bed and held his hand with one of hers. Katerina stood in the hold of her oldest brother and silently said goodbye to her father, along with the rest of the family. She knew that she would one day come to terms with the death of her father, but right now she hurt too much to do anything but silently cry and hold on to Frederick's arms. When King Julius finally slipped off into a peaceful, everlasting sleep, the newest little princess started wailing. It was like she knew her father was dead, even though she hadn't even opened her eyes for the first time yet. The whole kingdom mourned when the king passed. Katerina was heartbroken, and she relied heavily on Dmitri. The two tried to really get to know each other, but the situation they were in left much to be desired. They mourned for an entire week, as is part of the tradition. Normally everyone would mourn for a full year for a monarch's death, but the new monarch needed to be crowned as soon as possible. Then, in the way of tradition, Frederick got ready for his coronation. The whole family was both sad and happy while preparing for the coronation, but first they had to bury King Julius. They worked tirelessly to get him ready to be buried, dressing him up in his kingly dress clothes, and led his body to the family crypt on the grounds. Everyone wore black, even the knights, even the villagers, although no one but the Peterson royal family was allowed into the crypt. Not even Dmitri was allowed in, but he was okay with that. He waited outside of the crypt with the knights as the royal family said their final goodbyes. When Katerina came out of the crypt with her family, she ran straight into Dmitri's arms. She felt his arms tighten around her as she began to cry again. Everything was different now, and she didn't like it. She buried her face in his chest, and he placed his chin on her head. They all went on their way, and the organizing of decorations for the coronation began. They were all trying to make the best of a horrible situation. As the day of the coronation got closer, Frederick's shoulder healed, and he and Natalia debated on whether to share the news of Natalia's pregnancy or wait until a better time. Finally, the two decided to wait until after the coronation, when Katerina and Dmitri were officially engaged. Dmitri held onto Katerina when he found her crying outside the stables. He rubbed a hand up and down her back as she turned around and cried into his chest. She held onto his shirt, and he tightened his grip. "It's going to be okay, I promise. It will be okay." He nuzzled her head. Then he suggested a ride to help her calm down. "Let's go for a ride." She looked up at him, her tears slowing down. "A ride?" "Yes," Dmitri said. He smiled. "Maybe a ride will help you calm down a bit, and we can see how beautiful the world is." Katerina thought about it and nodded. "Okay." She followed him into the stables, and they each got their horses ready. She watched as Dmitri walked with his stallion outside. "He's good for me, girl." "But am I good for him?" Her mare nudged her gently, and her eyes seemed to show her support. "Okay, I understand, I think. Come on, let's go." Katerina led her horse outside and met up with Dmitri. About 2 more chapters. Getting to know you. And if you sing that title, you're not the only one. "Ready?" Dmitri smiled at her. When Katerina nodded, he continued. "Okay then. Let's head through the fields." He mounted his horse, watching as she also got in the saddle. Her moves were so fluid, and he couldn't help but stare. He realized that he was staring, and so he led the way through the gate closest to them. He was leading her through a field of grass where all of the children would come to play and run around in glee. As they rode, Katerina looked around. Dmitri was right. The world is beautiful, or was beautiful. She smiled when she saw that she could see down the hill to the village below. She looked for all of her favorite places, and she found a few, but most of them were hard for her to make out from this distance. She turned to look at Dmitri and laughed happily. feel so free up here." He chuckled. "I'm glad." He couldn't help but smile at her. He watched her as she slowly rode up the hill. Catching up with her, he asked, "Would you like to ride through the woods?" "Sure," Katerina replied. She followed him to the woods and onto a path. "I haven't been riding through the woods in a while." A slight breeze flowed through the woods, cooling them off. The leaves rustled slightly on the trees, and a squirrel lightly ran along a branch. Katerina and Dmitri glanced at each other and smiled. The weather was nice, and they were enjoying the light shining down through the tree canopy above them. Dmitri asked, "Is there anything you would like to do? Or go anywhere else?" "I think I would like to go back home now," she replied. "I think I'm relaxed enough to go back." Okay then. Dmitri led the way back to the castle with a small smile on his face. He rode, rocking slightly in the saddle, over the tiny creek at the edge of the woods. He glanced back to watch her cross and smiled at the sight. Her long dark hair was flowing down around her shoulders in long wavy locks. The sun was shining on her face, or shining down on her head, bringing little red highlights out and lighting up her face. Katerina looked at Dmitri with a confused look on her face. "What's wrong?" Dmitri smiled and shook his head. "Nothing. You just look beautiful." Katerina blushed, looking down. She didn't know what to think about the compliment he had given her. Glancing up, she smiled at him. "Thank you, Dmitri." His smile widened. "No problem. I only told the truth." He chuckled a little. "Do you still want to head back?" "Yes," Katerina replied, looking away from him in embarrassment. She couldn't believe that he really thought her beautiful. She followed him back to the stables, and they dismounted. The stable hand came out to take the horses. "No, I've got it, Red." "Your Highness, you go on over to the castle. I will take care of the horses." Red grinned at the princess. He knew her from when she was little, and he knew the buttons he could push with her. Katerina smiled at Red and agreed. "Fine." She gave him a look. Then she turned to Dmitri. "Let's head inside." She walked to the castle. As they stepped inside the castle, her mother met them at the door. "Mother, I need your help making plans for your brother's coronation. We have so much to decide on, and so little time to plan." Lonnie sighed, thinking of her late husband and her firstborn. Her hair was flowing down her back due to lack of care, and her black dress paled her fair skin. She knew she didn't look like her usual self, and it upset her to not show her usual grace. Katerina's face fell at the thought. She was happy for her brother, but it was too soon after her father's death. Katerina also noticed her mother's appearance and sighed. "Mother, why don't you go take a long bath? I'll do the planning for today." Lonnie started to protest, but Katerina stopped her. "You need to take care of yourself. You just had a baby, and you need to be taken care of." She shooed her mother away, motioning to a maid to take her, and sighed. It was going to be a long afternoon. Walking into the main sitting room, Katerina was bombarded by questions left and right from event staff. She held up her hand and waited for them to quiet down. When they didn't, her temper came out to play. Quiet! She glared at them. When your princess holds up her hand at your incessant badgering, you will shut up and let her speak, she said much more calmly than she wanted. Now, my mother is getting the care she needs, so I will be doing the planning today. She and I will work together tomorrow, okay? Katerina looked at each of the people in the room. She walked over to an armchair facing them and sat down. For Frederick's coronation, I think we need roses to symbolize our parents. The florist made a note. We need fabric in the family colors. They should be hung on the walls along the aisle that he has to walk, and on the pews. After listing what they needed, she led them to the throne room. Katerina sighed as she watched the group rush around getting ideas in the throne room. She couldn't believe that they were running around panicking about the coronation. Maybe it was because her mom had put her faith in Katerina. But the princess was feeling much calmer than usual in this crazy situation. She clapped her hands, drawing the attention of everyone in the room, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we want this to be perfect. We do not need to rush around in a panic. Calm down and let's get this done neatly." They all nodded, and she motioned for them to get back to work. "Princess," said a maid, "your mother would like an update on the planning." Katerina nodded. She looked around for a guard and found one. "Richard, please make sure they don't fight over the decorations." He smiled and nodded. When Katerina followed the maids out of the throne room and up the maid out of the throne room and up to the queen's chambers, her mother was sitting on a lounge looking out the window. "Mother," she said. Lonnie looked at her eldest daughter. "Come here, my dear." When Katerina walked over to sit beside her, she continued, "How is the planning going?" "It's going well. At first I was bombarded with questions, but after getting them quiet, I managed to relay instructions. I decided that we should have roses like Father used to bring you. Also, the family colors will be hanging on the walls, put on the aisle, and on each pew." Katerina looked at her mother for approval. "That sounds wonderful," Lonnie replied. "Your father would be proud of you as well. Tomorrow, I will help you. I hope that the event staff does not give you any more problems today." "I hope not," Katerina laughed. Final preparations. Katerina and her mother ran a tight ship when it came to the preparations of the coronation. They had the food planned out, the decorations planned out, the invitations were already sent out and replied to. The outfits were also planned and being made, and the setup was almost done. There would be no black outfits for this day, because for a coronation you needed to wear colorful clothes, no matter if you were still in mourning. Katerina found her mother in the king's chambers, where they spent all their married life together, crying on the bed the day before the coronation. "Oh, mother." She walked over to the bed and sat next to the queen. She helped her mother sit up and held her close. "Father will understand the importance of tomorrow. He'll always be in our hearts and will want you to be happy again." The Pope was to arrive that night, and the men that had retreated when Daniel Marquis Jr. did should probably be back at their village by now, or almost there. She was glad that everything, or almost everything, was over now. She wondered if they were going to be okay after what they went through for Daniel Marquis Sr. Jr. Accidentally typed Sr. Katerina walked out of the king's chambers and into the throne room. She wanted to see if everything was as perfect as she had planned, or planned with her mother's help. Frederick came into the throne room where Katerina stood looking at the decorations. "It looks lovely," he said, wrapping an arm around his younger sister's shoulders. Katerina looked up at him. "Thanks, Frederick." "You're welcome," he smiled. "You know, you've changed. You aren't the same jealous, spoiled, selfish girl you were before. I'm proud of you." Katerina blushed. "Thank you, brother. I know I can still be a little jealous and selfish sometimes. I mean, who isn't? But I will always be spoiled." She smiled. "Mother, father, you, and George made me that way." Frederick laughed. "You're right, we did." Her laugh joined his, spreading throughout the room and out into the hall. Everyone nearby that heard the noise couldn't help but smile in response. They were glad that the princess was happier than she was before the journey, and they were also glad that everyone was healing slightly from the death of the former king. The maids knew that there were still going to be many tears in the next year, but they were hopeful that everyone would be able to live a happier life still. The king-to-be was strolling through the village that afternoon, seeing the sights as a prince for the last time. The next time he came here would be as king. That was a scary thought. Frederick looked around, speaking to the villagers and seeing what they needed that he could change as king. It was always good practice to go out and see what your people need. He would have to journey around his country one day soon, just to make himself known to his people as the king. The Pope arrived at the castle and spoke in private with the Queen. He wanted to see what the plan was for when her son became king. He and Lonnie waited for Frederick to come back from the village, and when he did, they spoke to him about the ceremony. The Pope said, "You will have to stay the night in the chapel to meditate and reflect on your dreams for your future as king. While you meditate, seriously think about whether you will be a just king, a fair king, and a king that helps the people." "I understand, Your Holiness," Frederick said solemnly. The Pope led Frederick to the chapel after dinner. "Once you are inside, you cannot speak until you come back out. No one may visit you, and I alone will come get you in the morning." He turned his head to see if Frederick understood. "Are you ready?" "Yes, Your Holiness." Frederick took a deep breath before letting it out slowly. "Let's do this," he thought. Good. Frederick walked into the chapel behind the Pope and to the front of the room. Next to the podium from which the Pope spoke from was a stained glass window above the small platform. He was motioned to kneel before the platform, and then the Pope left. Frederick knelt on his knees, staring up at the stained glass window before him, and thought about what he had been tasked with. He reflected on his dreams of being king and what he thought the future might hold. He wanted to live a happy and long life, raise lots of kids with his lovely wife, and be a good king to his people. As he meditated, sitting back on his heels, he started to receive visions. Frederick was sitting on his throne when a man was dragged up to him. "This man was caught stealing my sheep," said the man dragging the other. "What is your verdict?" Frederick looked at the man that was being held by his shoulder. He thought about it and glanced at the two sides of the room. One side had a sign that said, "To the stocks / imprisonment for life." The other side had a sign that said, "Instant death or banishment." Frederick wanted to shout, but he wasn't allowed to talk during this ordeal. Looking back at the thief, Frederick couldn't make the decision without losing himself in it. The vision faded to another, where his mother, wife, brothers, and sisters were in chains. They were being judged, and the person that was doing the judging said, "Death." And the Queen Mother, Lani, was dragged screaming to one side of the room, where a huge man beheaded her. Frederick gave a silent yell, staring as his mother's body fell to the ground. Natalia was dragged forward. She's a good breeding woman. I'll have her go to the harem." The man waved his hand, and Natalia was dragged over to another area of the room. Frederick struggled to get to her to stop this, but it felt like he was stuck in place. Every tear falling from her eyes sent shockwaves to his heart. It hurt to watch what was going on with his family. George was killed. Katerina was taken to the harem. Thomas was taken to the army. Derek was taken to the docks. Blake was sold as a slave, and Adeline was sent to a different country. Frederick dropped to his knees as the vision faded. The door opened and the Pope walked to the figure kneeling on the platform. He put a hand on the young man's shoulder, making the young man jump. "Let's go." Frederick nodded, remembering to not speak until they got out. His legs were tingling, and he shook each leg out before he moved. When the Pope led Frederick out of the chapel, he shut the door and said, "Great job, my prince. You may speak now." Frederick cleared his throat. "Thank you, Your Holiness." His voice was a little rusty, and his clothes were rumpled. But he was happy that the ordeal was over. Now he just had to take a bath and eat before his coronation. Well, that was a lot to go over. Yep, that is the end of today's reading. We left off at a dun 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 moment. It is a bit of a cliffhanger. And let's see. The next one will be the coronation. The start of another journey. Not a big journey. And hopefully, something exciting will happen. Although I think something exciting was going to happen not next Monday, but maybe Wednesday or Friday of next week. Yeah, things are getting a little weird, as you might see. The family is grieving, and the oldest prince is about to be crowned king. Soon, within the next three, the next three readings, you will probably find out if they have a trial for Eduardo. And maybe there'll be a happily ever after. Who knows? All right. So, I do want to talk about the second book. Since I still have you here, I'm not going to run off. Let me get this situated. Here's the cover for the second book. And like I said last time, this has 4 POVs. I won't tell you who the POVs are yet, but let's see how many chapters there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 19, 20, 40 chapters. It's 40 chapters long, and it is about 56,000 words written. The first book is about 50,000. This one's 56,000. Also in this book, let's see. Let me read the back. Oh, no, I can't. Oof. It gives away a spoiler, and I can't do that. Yes, I'm teasing you. Sorry. They go on a much bigger adventure in this book, and maybe their world shifts. Maybe they find out more about it. Maybe they see a familiar face that is not exactly a happy face. Maybe there's another happily ever after. Maybe there's not. You'll just have to wait until maybe the week after next. I might start right away reading this book. And you can tell it is thick. It is a little bit thicker than the first book. All right, well, now that we are all done with the reading, I hope that sorry, I was checking something. I hope that you all enjoy the reading so far. Go check out my author page on Amazon. You will find it in the link of my previous video, and It's $3.99 for the first book if you want to catch up. And right now, I believe it's $2.99 for Order, which is the second book. All right. And as you know, I had to push back my release date for Youth. So not in 2 days, but in about a week and 1 day, my third book should release. All right, so today was fun. We got through a lot of the work, so I shall see you next time, Monday. And I might, since I have this deadline I have to do for Tuesday, I might just do a 5-hour stream tomorrow on YouTube only. And see if I can get a lot of writing done in those 5 hours. All right. I am going to give my word. I'll do it 5 hours tomorrow. Now I just have to remember to set my alarm tonight so I can wake up super bright and early. All right. Bye-bye.